The streets of Manhattan never slept. But for some, it wasn't the glow of the billboards or the ceaseless hum of taxis that defined the night. It was the ache of an empty stomach, the cold bite of early spring air, and the knowledge that no one saw you. Amani Sinclair, thin as rain and sharp-eyed as a stray cat, moved through the alleys and avenues with the grace of someone who had learned to go unseen. At 14, Amani had spent the last 3 years navigating the brutal maze of shelters, subway platforms, and over-policed parks. She knew which corner stores turned a blind eye to stolen fruit, and which security guards had a soft spot for her dimples. But tonight, hunger gnawed deeper than usual, and the city, swollen with wealth and carelessness, felt like it might swallow her whole. It was then, standing outside a glittering glass cafe on Madison Avenue, that she saw her. The woman was beautiful in the way of glossy magazines and whispered conversations in boardrooms, skin like porcelain, hair a perfect fall of blonde waves, the kind of tailored winter coat that cost more than Amani's mother had made in a year, back when they still had a home. She sat alone, a half-finished salad pushed aside, and a barely touched glass of wine sweating on the table. Amani hesitated. The cafe's outdoor terrace was lined with heated lamps, where Manhattan's elite kept winter at bay, while they sipped, gossiped, and ignored the world outside their velvet ropes. She knew the rules: don't approach, don't linger, don't be visible. But tonight the hunger was louder than the fear. She stepped closer. Excuse me, ma'am, Amani said, her voice barely a thread in the night air. Can I eat your leftovers? The woman looked up, startled. A fork paused halfway to her mouth, lips slightly parted. The other diners turned with practiced disinterest, their eyes sliding over Amani as though she were a sudden glitch in the simulation of their perfect evening. Amani's stomach clenched. She was used to the stares, the tight-lipped judgments, the quick shooing motions. She braced for it. But instead, the woman did something no one else had done in months. She really looked at her. For a long, strange moment, they held each other's gaze. Amani's eyes, dark and defiant despite the hollow in her cheeks, met the pale blue of the woman's, sharp, assessing, and something else. Something like recognition. What's your name? The woman asked quietly, setting down her fork. Amani, she replied, unsure whether to bolt or stand her ground. The woman gestured to the chair across from her. Sit down, Amani. Amani's throat tightened. She blinked. Surely she'd heard wrong. Ma'am, I just wanted the leftovers, that's all. I'll leave right after, promise. I said sit down. Her voice was softer this time, but firm in a way that brooked no refusal. I'll order you something fresh. Amani hesitated, then slipped into the chair, perching on the edge like a bird unsure of the branch beneath her. She expected the cafe staff to descend, expected the doorman to snatch her up by the collar, but no one moved. Amani's chest fluttered with a mix of terror and something dangerously close to hope. The woman extended a manicured hand. I'm Eleanor. Amani, she repeated, though she knew Eleanor already knew that. The waiter appeared, stiff and uncomfortable. Eleanor ordered another meal, hot tea, a dessert. When he left, she turned back to Amani with a strange tightness around her mouth. Where are your people? Eleanor asked. Amani shrugged. Gone. It's just me now. There was no pity in Eleanor's face, and Amani was grateful for it. What she saw instead was calculation, not cruel, but sharp, the kind of look people gave objects they suddenly realized were valuable. Amani wondered what she saw in her. You shouldn't be out here alone, Eleanor said. Amani gave a crooked, bitter smile. And where else should I be? It wasn't a question Eleanor could answer. Across the terrace, other patrons whispered behind gloved hands, eyes narrowing with indignation or amusement. A black girl from the street sitting at a table like that with someone like her. It didn't happen. It wasn't allowed. But it did. And in that moment, under the warm lamps and indifferent stars, something cracked open. A doorway between two lives that were never meant to intersect. Amani reached for the cup of tea when it arrived, wrapping her chilled hands around the porcelain. She was still too hungry to believe this was real, still too tired to trust it. But her eyes never left Eleanor's, and neither did Eleanor's leave hers. If this story of injustice and transformation moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that turn pain into power. The city belonged to ghosts. Amani Sinclair had learned this long before she learned to tie her own shoes. Manhattan was a shrine to invisible people, the ones who drifted through the marble corridors cleaning up after lives they could never afford, the ones who hustled sandwiches and fake handbags and hope on street corners, and the ones like her, who existed just beyond the glow of street lamps, not quite gone, not quite seen. She'd been 9 when the system spat her out. A mother who vanished into the folds of addiction, a father she never met, a grandmother whose heart finally gave out during one of those long, bitter winters when the heat shut off and the world forgot them. For a while there were shelters, but each one worse than the last, until Amani learned the hardest truth of all. Sometimes it was safer in the streets than between 4 walls. She adapted, fast. She learned which church basements gave out warm meals on Tuesdays, which trash bins outside bakeries still had unsold pastries if you were quick. She learned which cops would look the other way, and which would shove you into a squad car just for being alive in their line of sight. But what she learned best was how to disappear. Amani wasn't tall or loud like some of the other kids who ran in tight street packs. She was quick and clever, eyes always scanning, ears tuned for threats or chances. She never begged. That was a rule. Asking for something made you small, made you vulnerable. Tonight had been the first time she'd spoken to a stranger like that in months, and even then, she hadn't begged. The memory of Eleanor's eyes lingered with her as she moved through the Upper East Side's hushed streets later that night. She'd left the cafe reluctantly, the leftover sandwich in a brown paper bag still warm against her palm. Eleanor hadn't asked her to stay. She hadn't tried to pry or deliver empty promises about charities and shelters. She just watched Amani leave, that same unreadable expression in her pale face. Amani ducked into an alley off 79th, the kind of narrow space between buildings where no one looked, where she sometimes stashed her things. Plastic bag with a pair of jeans too big for her, and a book. The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois, water-warped but still legible. A security guard at the New York Public Library had given it to her once when he caught her sleeping in the stairwell. "You got a brain, girl," he'd said, "feed it." She had. The streets didn't want smart girls. Smart girls asked too many questions, noticed too many things. Smart girls didn't survive long. But Amani had figured out how to play it dumb when she had to, and keep the rest to herself. The sandwich was gone in minutes. She ate fast, crouched in the shadows, watching the world roll on. Couples walked hand in hand, cabbies cursed at one another. Doormen stood sentry in front of buildings taller than mountains. No one saw her. No one ever did. But Eleanor had. That unsettled Amani more than the hunger or the cold. That a person like that, clean, polished, cushioned by wealth, would look at her and not immediately dismiss her, not shrink away like she was contagious. She didn't know what to make of it. "Gonna get yourself killed with that kind of hope," she muttered to no one. Hope was dangerous currency. You couldn't eat it. You couldn't use it to barter for a warm place to sleep. And yet somehow, that woman's gaze stayed with her. Amani pulled the worn book from its hiding place and flipped it open by instinct. The pages smelled like dust and ink, and all the people who would never read them. Her fingers traced a line she'd memorized months ago. The world-old phenomenon of the contact of diverse races of men. She didn't know exactly what it meant yet, but it felt important. In the distance, sirens wailed. Somewhere, glass shattered. Amani gathered her few belongings and slipped deeper into the night. There were no heroes in this city. No one came for girls like her. She'd built a world where she was both ghost and guard, where nobody could touch her. But tonight, someone had. Not with pity, not with charity, just with eyes that saw. And that kind of thing could ruin you. Eleanor Whitmore was an institution in New York's upper crust, a name whispered with a kind of reverence at charity galas and editorial meetings. Her face graced the pages of lifestyle magazines, always captured in just the right light, the gleam of her blonde hair a signature mark of old money elegance. At 42, she had mastered the art of effortless philanthropy, a woman whose every cause seemed conveniently aligned with cocktail hour and photo opportunities. But behind the cashmere wraps and art auctions was a truth she buried so deep, not even the manicured portraits on her walls reflected it. Eleanor was exhausted. Not in the way the tabloids sometimes speculated, with their smug headlines about socialite burnout and charity fatigue. It was the exhaustion of a woman who'd built her life on a lie so delicate, so surgically perfect, that any crack in its surface threatened to swallow her whole. It hadn't always been this way. She was born into it. Whitmore money, Whitmore legacy. Her father, Randall Whitmore, had built empires on other people's backs, discreetly acquiring slum housing in the 80s, driving out black and brown families to make way for glossy developments. The city's resurrection had come at a cost, and the Whitmores had cashed every receipt. Eleanor, their only child, was raised in penthouses and country estates, in rooms so large they echoed. She learned early how to be ornamental, the perfect society daughter, seen but not heard, smiling in designer dresses while beneath the table her small hands clenched into fists. By 25, she'd married Graham Kavanaugh, a hedge fund prodigy who looked good on her arm and knew how to keep quiet. The marriage was glossy and bloodless, built for public consumption. He traveled. She hosted benefits. They were New York's modern aristocracy. And yet, for all its silk and marble, there was always the hum of something wrong beneath Eleanor's skin. It wasn't until her mother's death 6 years ago that the fractures in the family myth started to widen. At the funeral, in a room filled with power suits and murmured condolences, Eleanor overheard a conversation not meant for her. An old man, a former Whitmore attorney half-blind with age and whiskey, muttering to another about those babies and the adoption scheme. She hadn't understood it then, but it stayed. Over time, Eleanor began to notice things. Family records that didn't add up. Charities the Whitmores had funded that quietly disappeared. Rumors of illegal adoptions in the 80s and 90s, where poor black mothers were coerced into signing away their children under threats of eviction or worse. A practice buried beneath layers of legalese and political favors. Her father was long dead by then, and no one else in the family spoke of the past. Eleanor became skilled at pretending not to notice. It was easier, safer. The price of survival was silence, but the burden weighed heavier every year, which was why that night at the cafe, when that girl with fire in her eyes asked for her leftovers, something cracked. Eleanor hadn't meant to stop her. She hadn't meant to ask her name or order her food or look at her the way she did. It wasn't charity. It wasn't guilt. It was something else. Recognition. A spark of memory she couldn't place. And it terrified her. After Amani left, Eleanor sat in that cafe chair long after the wine had warmed and the candles burned low. She ignored the sidelong glances, the knowing looks from the other women at nearby tables. She let their disdain wash over her like the tide. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt something dangerously close to alive. At home, she poured herself a glass of whiskey and opened a file she kept locked in a private drawer. An old, yellowed photograph. 4 infants in a grim, windowless room. No names, no dates. Just a note scrawled in the margin. Placement secured. Kavanaugh, deal finalized. Her stomach turned. She didn't know why she kept it. Proof of what? She told herself it was a relic of her father's sins, that it meant nothing now. But it did. It meant everything. And for the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to wonder if one of those infants, with dark curls and wide, solemn eyes, could have survived. Could have grown up in this same city hardened by it, invisible inside it. Could have been that girl. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. On impulse, she opened her banking app and wired a sum large enough to erase years of hunger. Not to a shelter or a foundation, directly to a prepaid card number one of her lawyers had once set up for a quiet case. She didn't know if it would reach Amani, didn't even know how to find her. But she would. Because some debts were older than the bloodlines that tried to bury them, and Eleanor Whitmore had just taken her first step into a story she could no longer control. The next day dawned brittle and gray, the kind of New York morning that felt like an old bruise pressed under cold fingers. Amani surfaced from sleep in a shadowed alcove behind a shuttered pharmacy on 116th. The night chill clung to her bones, her stomach knotted and sharp. She stretched, careful of the thin blanket she kept hidden beneath a crate, and gathered the few things she owned: the worn book, a cracked cell phone with no service, and the sandwich wrapper from the night before. For a few minutes she sat still, watching the city wake up without her. Delivery trucks hissed steam at street corners, doormen swept sidewalks, school kids with bright backpacks waited on corners while mothers scrolled through their phones. The world spun on, busy and oblivious. She should have let the moment at the cafe disappear like everything else. But it clung to her, that strange encounter with the white woman in the tailored coat and winter pale hands. The way she'd looked at Amani, not through her, not over her, at her. It gnawed at Amani like hunger. People didn't do that. Not here. By noon, she found herself back in the neighborhood, near Madison and 77th, circling the cafe she couldn't afford to name out loud. She didn't know what she was hoping for. Another free sandwich? A repeat of that unexplainable flicker of dignity? Or maybe just proof that she hadn't dreamed it. She was about to turn away when the glass doors swung open and Eleanor stepped onto the sidewalk. Different today. No fur-lined coat, no visible entourage, no air of practiced distance. She wore dark sunglasses and carried a simple leather satchel. Amani froze. Eleanor's eyes flicked toward her immediately, as though she'd sensed the girl before she'd seen her. She lowered her sunglasses. "You're following me," Eleanor said, not unkindly. Amani stiffened. "I wasn't. This is a public street." A half smile tugged at the corner of Eleanor's mouth. "It is. You hungry?" Amani hesitated. She didn't trust this, didn't trust anyone with that much polish in their voice. But her stomach growled, traitorous and loud. She hated how heat rose to her face. "I'm fine," Amani lied. "No, you're not." Eleanor gestured toward the small park across the street. "Come on, we'll sit somewhere less obnoxious." Amani followed at a distance, wary, already rehearsing an escape route if this turned. In Central Park, Eleanor found a bench beneath a bare-limbed tree and sat. She didn't gesture or command, just waited. Slowly, Amani perched at the other end of the bench. They sat in silence. The wind stirred the brittle leaves at their feet. Eleanor reached into her bag and produced a wrapped sandwich, handing it over without ceremony. "You don't owe me," she said, as if sensing the protest in Amani's throat. "Eat." Amani devoured it in measured bites, fighting the urge to bolt. She didn't look at Eleanor until the sandwich was gone and her hands were empty again. "You're not like them," Amani said finally. "Like who?" "The ones who sit in places like that cafe. Who look at people like me like we're part of the trash." Eleanor stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. "I used to be." "Why'd you stop?" A long pause. "I met someone," Eleanor said. "Someone who made me see what I didn't want to see. Someone like you." Amani narrowed her eyes. "What happened to them?" "They disappeared," Eleanor admitted quietly. "People like my father made sure of it." Amani's skin prickled. She didn't know what it meant, didn't like the weight of those words. "You think giving me food makes up for that?" "No," Eleanor said. "It doesn't." The wind rattled the branches overhead. Across the park, a wedding party posed for photos, bright against the city's gray edges. Amani watched them and wondered what it felt like to belong to a world where people clapped when you kissed someone in front of strangers. "I draw," Amani blurted. Eleanor blinked. "What?" "I sketch stuff. People, places, streets, It's just in this notebook I keep. Nobody sees it. Can I? Amani hesitated, then shook her head. Not yet. Eleanor didn't push. She just nodded. Okay. And there it was. The one thing Amani hadn't expected. Not pity, not charity. Permission. They sat there, two women from different universes, bound by an unspoken, impossible thread. Neither knew what came next. Neither trusted it. But for the first time in a long while, neither was entirely alone. Word travels differently on the Upper East Side. It isn't shouted, tweeted, or posted. It travels in glances exchanged over rimmed glasses of imported wine, in murmured side comments between yoga class and gallery openings. It hums beneath conversations like a second, sharper language, one that says everything the speaker is too polished to admit. By the following afternoon, word about Eleanor Whitmore's incident at the cafe had slithered through the arteries of Manhattan's elite. Not the details, not the ache of a hungry girl, or the brittle snap of silence when two lives touched. No, just the scandal of it, the impropriety. She let a vagrant sit at her table in broad daylight. I heard she bought her a meal. People were staring. Eleanor's always had these eccentricities. In the sun-washed conservatory of the Van Dorrington estate, Clarissa Bainbridge delivered the news with the glee of a predator tasting fresh blood. She's becoming a liability, Clarissa said, stirring her tea. We can't have that. The other women in the circle nodded in careful agreement. Their faces were flawless masks of concern, but beneath them simmered something sharper. Fear. Eleanor Whitmore's place in their world was secure because she followed the rules. The moment she didn't, she became dangerous. That evening, Eleanor felt the shift. It wasn't a direct confrontation. It never was. It came in polite absences. No invitation to the new charity launch. A gala date rescinded at the last moment. A sharp smile from Camille Vaughn at the museum fundraiser that didn't quite reach her eyes. Whispers she caught only when she entered a room. Shame, really. She's always been unstable. Grief does terrible things to a woman. Eleanor stood in those glittering rooms and watched as old friends retracted like silk curtains closing in the wind. And yet, what surprised her wasn't the rejection. It was the absence of regret. She hadn't realized how heavy their approval had been until she felt it lift. 2 days later, Eleanor returned to the park bench, as she'd done each evening since. Amani was there, waiting this time, sketchbook balanced on her knees, pencil moving in sharp, quick strokes. You came back, Eleanor said. I figured you might need someone to talk to, Amani replied without looking up. Eleanor laughed, a short, startled sound. You have no idea how true that is. Amani glanced sideways. They're talking about you. I know. They're pissed you sat with me, fed me, acted like I wasn't garbage. Eleanor winced. You're not garbage. Tell them that. Amani flipped the sketchbook around. On the page was a drawing, the cafe terrace, the sleek diners in their glass cage, and a figure like a shadow just outside it. And Eleanor, a soft burst of pale in the center, looking directly at the figure. It wasn't beautiful. It was true. Eleanor's throat tightened. You're good. I'm not supposed to be. Amani shrugged. I'm supposed to be hungry and invisible. A silence stretched between them, heavy and unvarnished. Eleanor looked down at the paper and then, for the first time, spoke aloud a name she hadn't let herself say in years. My sister would have been your age. Amani froze. I never knew her, Eleanor said. She disappeared before I was old enough to ask. Family never spoke about it. One day she was gone, and the next there were no photographs, no stories, nothing. Just erasure. Amani's brow furrowed. You think she was like me? I think she was you, Eleanor whispered, voice breaking. And just like that, the fragile line between them wasn't charity anymore. It was blood. Amani's jaw tightened. Why are you telling me this now? Because they'll come after you, Eleanor said. They already are, not the police. Worse, The beautiful people. They'll lock doors you didn't know existed. They'll smear you so you can't work, can't rent, can't exist in their city. I already can't, Amani said. But you will, Eleanor promised. And when you do, I want them to know you by name. She pulled a card from her coat pocket and handed it over. No title, no address. Just a phone number and a name. Eleanor Whitmore. Amani took it slowly, like a lit match she wasn't sure whether to cup or let burn. Neither spoke for a long time. But in that evening's heavy hush, as the park lamps hummed to life, a reckoning began to gather itself. And somewhere nearby behind a curtain, an old money hand picked up a phone. It had begun. There are things people forget, and there are things they bury. Eleanor Whitmore had spent years burying, until the weight of it left her breathless in rooms she used to command. She carried the practiced grace of the untouchable, until a street girl's face cracked the mask. She hadn't told Amani the whole truth on that park bench. Couldn't. Not yet. But that night, as city lights bled across her penthouse windows, Eleanor opened the old trunk in the corner of her study. Not the one with birth certificates and family deeds. The other one. The one she wasn't supposed to remember existed. Inside, yellowed news clippings, faded photographs, letters with brittle edges, and at the very bottom, a single black and white image of a baby, chubby-cheeked, wide-eyed, with a birthmark just under her left ear. A mark Eleanor recognized immediately, because she'd seen it before, on Amani. A flicker of it when the girl had bent over her sandwich on the cafe terrace, brushing a braid aside. A half-moon scar, nearly invisible but achingly familiar. Eleanor's stomach lurched. She sifted through the rest. Legal documents with words like unfit mother, sealed adoption, and private placement. Names crossed out. Payments recorded. The year matched Amani's age. A ghost from her father's ledgers. Her fingers trembled. Because that name, Sinclair, it was one she remembered hearing whispered behind closed doors as a child, in the language adults used when they didn't think you were listening. She didn't want to believe it, didn't want to accept what that meant. Because if Amani wasn't just another orphan, if she was one of them, one of the stolen, the discarded, the placement children from her father's purge, then everything Eleanor had ever built her life on wasn't just stained. It was built on stolen blood. The next afternoon, Eleanor arrived early at the park bench. She carried no food this time, no charity, just the same plain coat and a sick weight in her chest. Amani was already there. The girl's face was tense, eyes darker than usual. A storm behind them. "You lied to me," Amani said flatly, before Eleanor could speak. Eleanor stiffened. "About what?" "I asked around," Amani said. "Some of the old-timers down on 117th, the ones who remember the Whitmore scandals. You didn't just lose a sister. Your family ran a program, paid to take kids from single black mothers, sold them off to your rich friends, told the city it was for their own good." Eleanor's heart hammered. "I know. And you sat at that cafe, fed me like some charity project, knowing you were part of it." "I didn't know about you," Eleanor said hoarsely. "Not then. But you knew people like me existed, and you left us out here." Eleanor had no defense. She didn't even try. Amani's jaw clenched. "So what do you want now? A redemption arc? Some neat little photo op for your next benefit?" "I want to tell the truth," Eleanor said. "About all of it, publicly." Amani's gaze was hard. "You think people like you lose when you tell the truth? You'll be fine. You'll land somewhere safe. It's people like me who get crushed." "No," Eleanor said, "not this time." Amani laughed, not cruelly but weary. "You don't get it, lady. You can't save me. I'm not your mistake to fix." "I don't want to save you," Eleanor said. "I want you standing beside me when I burn them down." That stopped Amani. A long, brittle silence stretched between them. The city moved around them, uncaring. "Why?" Amani asked at last. "Because I can't be the woman who sits in a room full of devils and keeps quiet anymore," Eleanor said. "Because my blood's on this too, and if I can't clean it, the least I can do is make them bleed for it." The rawness in her voice made Amani's chest tighten. "I don't trust you," Amani said. "You shouldn't. But I hate them more." A beat. "Then let's make it hurt," Amani finished. They didn't shake hands, didn't hug. This wasn't a truce. It was a weapon, newly forged. And somewhere high above them, another name was added to the watch list, because the beautiful people saw it too now, and they were afraid. The first crack in the fortress came quietly. It wasn't a scandal splashed across page 6 or a breathless expose on the evening news. It was a misplaced file in an archive no one visited anymore, a dusty envelope left behind when Randall Whitmore's estate was liquidated. Eleanor found it by accident, though deep down, she suspected some long-dead ancestor's guilt might have left it waiting. Inside were contracts, names, transactions, dozens of them. And one name in particular that made Eleanor's breath seize: Celeste Sinclair, Amani's mother. The file listed Celeste as a voluntary placement, a lie buried beneath pages of legal jargon. There was no record of where the child was sent, only a payment made to a private adoption agency now defunct, and a memo noting the placement was arranged by Vaughn Whitmore Holdings. That name again. Vaughn, Camille Vaughn, the queen bee of the Upper East Side social ladder, a woman who had built her fortune on old oil money and whispered alliances, and right there in the ledger, Sinclair baby transferred to Vaughn Whitmore private estate. Final disposition confidential. Eleanor's stomach churned. This wasn't an adoption. It was disposal. Later that night, at a charity auction for the New York Symphony, Eleanor approached Camille Vaughn like a ghost emerging from a mirror. The ballroom was its usual glittering self: crystal chandeliers, couture gowns, men in tailored suits, their faces flush with old wine and older money. Camille stood near the auction tables, framed in champagne and cruelty. She smiled as Eleanor approached. "I hear you've taken up street philanthropy," Camille said sweetly. "How quaint." Eleanor's voice was low. "We need to talk." "Whatever for, darling. The board's already worried about your choices." Eleanor's hand slid into her pocket, fingers curling around a single page she'd pulled from the file. "Celeste Sinclair," she said. The color drained from Camille's face so fast it made Eleanor sick. "You've lost your mind," Camille hissed, mask slipping for the first time in decades. "Funny," Eleanor murmured. "That's exactly what they said about Celeste when she came back looking for the daughter you sold. People around them pretended not to notice. That was how this world worked. Scandal was acceptable if it stayed quiet. I don't know what you think you found. I found proof," Eleanor said, her voice cold as glass. "Proof that you and my father ran an adoption ring, that you made fortunes off the bodies of black children." Camille's hand shook. "You'll bury yourself with this, Eleanor." "I don't care," she said. "I'm done living inside your lie." Back in the park, Amani waited. The winter air was sharp, and she kept her notebook close, sketching the outlines of the skyscrapers like jagged teeth against the sky. She didn't trust Eleanor, not completely, but something in the woman's face that day, that raw, breaking thing, made Amani believe she was dangerous to the right people. When Eleanor appeared at dusk, her face pale and tight, Amani closed her sketchbook. "You get what you needed." Eleanor sat down heavily. "Camille Vaughn's been running this city's underworld longer than anyone knew. I've got names, records, and witnesses." Amani's brow lifted. "And you're gonna blow it up?" Eleanor's smile was grim. "You and me. Together." Amani considered that. Her whole life she'd stayed alive by avoiding battles she couldn't win. But maybe some fights weren't about survival. Maybe they were about tearing the walls down so no one else got locked outside. She nodded. "All right," Amani said. "But if we do this, we do it my way." Eleanor nodded back. "I was counting on it." In the near distance, a figure in a dark coat watched from the shadow of a tree, a phone to his ear. She made contact again, he murmured. And the girls involved. A voice on the other end was brittle and sharp. Make it disappear. But this wasn't a story they could bury anymore. Not this one. Amani had known since she was small that talent without safety was a curse. The streets weren't a place for girls with clever hands or sharp eyes. The only currency that mattered was toughness, and even that ran thin when the city decided you were a nuisance. She never showed anyone her sketchbooks, not at the shelters, where bigger girls would steal them for kindling. Not on the subway, where men followed you if they saw your face too long. She kept them close, wrapped in an old denim jacket, pages heavy with images that didn't belong to a world like hers. Until Eleanor. That night, after their silent pact in the park, Amani walked her back to a brownstone Eleanor rarely used, too modest for a Whitmore, which was exactly why she liked it. The woman poured whiskey into a pair of glasses and gestured for Amani to sit at the long oak table scattered with papers and old photographs. Show me, Eleanor said. Amani hesitated. Why? Because you see things the way they really are. For a long moment, Amani wrestled with it. Then, cautiously, she unwrapped the sketchbook and pushed it across the table. Eleanor opened it slowly and stopped breathing. There, in stark graphite lines, were portraits of faces Amani had caught in passing. The doorman who always gave her stale pastries, the exhausted nurse who snuck her aspirin when her head pounded, the old woman with the sunken eyes who never spoke, and among them, Camille Vaughn. Drawn from a distance, but unmistakable, the arch of her mouth, the slant of her brows, caught in a moment of cold disdain as she exited a black car on Fifth Avenue. How did you? Eleanor whispered. I see people, Amani shrugged. Even the ones pretending I don't exist. Eleanor flipped to the next page. A building facade. The old Whitmore family estate on the Upper East Side drawn from the sidewalk, its ornate gates twisted into teeth. Below it, Amani had scrawled a single word. Cages. You've been watching us, Eleanor murmured. Somebody had to. The last page stopped her cold. It was a scene Eleanor recognized, though she'd never seen it with her own eyes. A dark room, a row of metal cribs. A woman's face, black and terrified, reaching through the bars for a child being carried away by a man in a tailored suit. It wasn't a memory. It couldn't be. But Amani had drawn it. I've dreamed it since I was a kid, Amani admitted quietly. I thought it wasn't real. Until you started talking about those files, the names, the deals. Eleanor's hands trembled as she traced the figure in the drawing. That was Celeste, she whispered. And she knew then, knew in the marrow of her bones, that this wasn't coincidence, that whatever tethered them wasn't accident or guilt, it was blood. Across town, Camille Vaughn sat in her penthouse study, nursing a glass of Pinot and watching the night stretch beyond her windows. Her phone buzzed. They made contact, her man reported. The Sinclair girl showed Whitmore the book. Camille's fingers tightened on the glass. Then it's time. Arrange the offer. Quietly. You think she'll sell? She's a street rat, Camille sneered. Everyone has a price. The next afternoon, a clean-shaven man in an expensive coat found Amani near the park, where she sketched beneath the brittle trees. He smiled too easily. Miss Sinclair, I represent some very generous interests. They'd like to offer you an opportunity. Amani didn't even look up. Not interested. He knelt beside her, voice low. 500,000. Tax-free. A place upstate. Art school, clean slate. All you have to do is leave the city. Today. Amani's pencil paused. Why now? She asked flatly. Because you're a problem, he said, still smiling. And we're very good at solving problems. Amani turned, met his eyes. I'm not for sale. He didn't blink. Then you'll wish you were. She stood, leaving the sketchbook open to a page where she'd drawn his face hours before he arrived, and walked away. Back to Eleanor. Back to war. The beautiful people didn't like scenes. They settled things in quiet rooms with discreet calls and off-record meetings. Their power wasn't in the overt, but in the unspoken, in knowing what names to drop, what secrets to bury, what hands to shake. Which is why, when Eleanor Whitmore marched into the boardroom of the Whitmore Foundation with Amani Sinclair at her side, the air snapped taut as glass. The board had gathered on short notice, summoned under the guise of an urgent asset review. Men in expensive suits and sharp-boned women with wary eyes. Camille Vaughn at the head of the table, the embodiment of composed venom. Eleanor dropped a thick folder onto the polished table with a flat, hollow thud. "Let's skip the pleasantries," she said. "I'm here to dissolve this board." A silence followed, tight as wire. Camille's voice cut through it. "You're delirious. I have records," Eleanor said, her gaze unflinching. "The Sinclair file, the placement contracts, your signatures, my father's, dates, transactions, witnesses." Camille's smile didn't falter, but a vein ticked at her temple. "You'd burn your own house down." "It was never mine to begin with," Eleanor answered. Amani said nothing, standing steady beside her, one hand gripping the sketchbook like a weapon. Camille shifted in her chair. "Even if any of that were true, no one will touch us. The press is ours, the judges are ours. Who do you think you're threatening?" "I'm not threatening," Eleanor said softly. "I'm broadcasting." On cue, the giant screen behind her flickered to life. A live feed from the Grand Metropolitan Hall. Journalists packed wall to wall. A banner overhead. Historic revelations. Whitmore legacy uncovered. Camille's composure cracked. "You wouldn't." "I already did." On the screen, a speaker approached the podium. A young black woman in a tailored jacket. Amani. The room in the boardroom spun with tension. One of the directors cursed under his breath. "You'll ruin everything," Camille hissed. "I'm counting on it," Eleanor replied. At the press conference, Amani's voice rang out, firm and low. "My name is Amani Sinclair. I am one of many, stolen, discarded. Left to survive a city built to pretend we don't exist." She opened her sketchbook, held it high. "These are the faces you never see, the ones they buried beneath glass towers and silk-lined boardrooms." Behind her, screens displayed her drawings, the lost children, the complicit faces of the powerful, the rooms where deals were made. Amani's voice didn't waver. For years, the Whitmore Foundation and its partners, including Vaughn Holdings, participated in illegal adoptions and displacements targeting marginalized families. "We have names, we have records, and we're not asking permission anymore." The room erupted. Cameras flashed, the old order buckled. Back at the boardroom, Camille stood, trembling with fury. "You'll burn with us, Whitmore." "Maybe," Eleanor said, "but I'll burn it all down first." Amani stepped forward. "You thought a girl like me wouldn't fight back, that no one would believe me, that your money made you untouchable." Her voice was steady, sharp. "You were wrong." Outside, sirens wailed. Not for them, but for a system unraveling. Federal subpoenas were already landing. Bank accounts frozen, private jets grounded. One by one, the directors slipped away, like rats from a drowning ship. Camille remained seated, her face a ruin. Eleanor leaned in close. "You built this city on stolen blood, and now it's coming to collect," Amani added, "and we're not done yet." The aftermath began before the ink dried. News anchors called it the Sinclair Revelation. Protesters flooded the streets outside Vaughn Holdings. Whistleblowers emerged from the shadows. An industry built on selective blindness finally forced to see. And at the heart of it, a girl who'd once asked for leftovers. Now a symbol, now a name no one could pretend to forget. In the weeks that followed, Manhattan convulsed like a wounded animal. The fall of Vaughn Holdings sent shockwaves through the glass towers of the elite. Long-protected names surfaced in court filings, and people who'd once moved like untouchable gods now scuttled in back exits, clutching overnight bags. Fortunes evaporating faster than old loyalties. Camille Vaughn was indicted on 7 counts of conspiracy, illegal adoption trafficking, and obstruction. She was arrested at dawn, her silk robe clashing against the hard plastic cuffs. The press devoured it. The old lioness of New York's social order, dragged from her penthouse like one of the street kids she'd once sold. Eleanor Whitmore testified before a grand jury the following week. Her face gaunt, hair pulled back, she spoke of the sins of her father and the network that preserved them. She named names, turned over ledgers. Ignited infernos in legacy law firms and private clubs where power was traded like rare wine. And through it all, Amani Sinclair stood at the center, unflinching. She became the face of a reckoning no one had asked for, but that the city had long owed. The Amani Sinclair Foundation was announced just 30 days after the public revelations. Funded by the liquidation of Vaughn and Whitmore assets, its mission was to locate and support survivors of the illegal displacement scheme and offer legal aid to families fractured by the system. The old Whitmore building, once a symbol of exclusion, was rechristened the Sinclair Center for Justice and the Arts. Amani refused to let them forget what had been done. On the day the new sign was raised, she stood on the building's steps, dressed not in designer charity gala wear, but in a thrifted leather jacket, her braids loose against her shoulders. Eleanor stood beside her, older now in ways no mirror could capture, but finally unmasked. "You sure you're ready for this?" Eleanor asked. Amani smiled, slow and sharp. "I was born ready." The ceremony was modest. No red carpets, no celebrity endorsements. Just survivors, community elders, and the children of those once buried by the system. Amani spoke first. "I'm not a miracle," she told the crowd. "I'm what happens when you leave people no choice but to fight." The applause wasn't polite. It was thunder. In the weeks that followed, more whistleblowers came forward. Other cities began their own investigations. Forgotten records were dragged into light. People who had long called themselves benefactors now found themselves defendants. And the faces Amani once sketched in private, they hung in the Sinclair Center's first exhibition, titled The Unseen. Every portrait labeled not by the name given to them by a system, but by the one they chose for themselves. On the final night of the exhibition, Eleanor walked the gallery alone. She stopped in front of a portrait of a young girl, wide-eyed, fierce, a scar beneath one ear. The placard read, "Celeste's daughter." "She was always coming back for you," Eleanor whispered. And for the first time in decades, she felt the old weight lift. Outside, Amani sat on the front steps, sketchbook in hand, watching the city pulse by. She wasn't invisible anymore. Not here, not now. But she knew better than to believe the fight was over. The system didn't vanish. It rebuilt itself like water finding new cracks. But this time, people like her had names, had places, had weapons. As the evening light faded, a reporter approached. "Miss Sinclair, any final thoughts for the city?" Amani looked up, her smile quiet, steady. "Yeah," she said. "We're not asking anymore. We're taking what's ours." And with that, she stood, tucking her sketchbook beneath her arm, and disappeared into a city that would never again be allowed to pretend she wasn't there. And so it ended, not with neat resolutions or clean victories, but with a war-worn truce between past sins and present demands. Eleanor Whitmore paid her penance not with exile, but with work. She spent the rest of her days funding causes no society column would ever print, speaking names she once erased, and standing alongside those she'd been raised to ignore. Amani Sinclair's story did not become the sanitized parable of a street girl lifted by charity. It became a testament to survival, to fury, to the knowledge that some wounds refuse to stay buried. And to the truth that sometimes the most dangerous person in a broken city isn't the one with power, it's the one who learns to see